Now take our final presentation from Sejer Andersen.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, distinguished members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. As we have just heard, sport is unrivaled as a global entertainment industry, but it has come at a high price. The old amateur structures have not been able to defend the best interests of sport against an invasion of people who use sport as a vehicle for fast, unethical, and sometimes illegal business practices. It is fair to say that in these years, the relation between the sports movement and the surrounding world has come to a crossroad. Therefore, I compliment you on staging this hearing, and on behalf of Play the Game, I would like to express our warm thanks for the invitation to contribute. Since 1997, Play the Game has staged 7 international conferences on the light as well as the dark sides of sport. On one hand, it addresses the positive impact of movement culture, and on the other, it looks at problems such as doping, corruption, match fixing, and various forms of political and human abuse of sport. More often, we have found that whatever challenge that we've been talking about, the solution would depend on something that was very hard to find: honest, efficient, and democratic leadership, or to sum it up, good governance in sport. So, my focus within this very narrow time frame will be on the need for good governance and the role that the European Union can play in getting sport back on a democratic track. But let me first take you back to the EU Sports Forum in Budapest in 2011, where at the end of a marathon debate, a little rounded man grabbed the microphone from the floor. He said that corruption was everywhere in the international sports federations. It was influencing elections, allocation of mega events, even doping tests, everything. He called for public awareness because without the help of the public, no solutions would be found. He urged the EU Commissioner to intervene. If nothing happened, the future would be difficult. New groups of sport leaders were emerging from countries where money seemed to grow on trees, and they could buy all the influence they would. This warning did not come from a radical anti-corruption activist. It came from a sports leader with 4 decades of experience on the international arena, the Hungarian president of the International Weightlifting Federation, Tamás Ajan, honorary member of the International Olympic Committee. His words point to the fact that football enjoys no monopoly of bad governance, although it is fully justified that FIFA is currently under public scrutiny. Allow me 2 examples from other sports. One of the richest federations, the International Volleyball Federation, FIVB, was for 24 years, from 1984 to 2008, presided by Rubén Acosta from Mexico. He introduced 2 special rules. One was that anybody that signed a sponsor or TV contract on behalf of the FIVB could cash in 10% of the contract sum as a personal bonus. The second rule was that the president signs all contracts. When a few courageous officials started voicing critics, Rubén Acosta introduced a code of ethics by which he authorized himself to expel dissenting persons, and so he did. The FIVB has later admitted in secret documents that Acosta got away with a personal profit of at least $33 million. So the price of Acosta's regime was paid by sport and by the many well-merited volleyball leaders that were banned for life from their beloved sport, so they could not even enter their local club. For one volleyball leader, the man who exposed Acosta's corruption to the world, the consequence has been brutal. The former president of Argentine volleyball, Mario Goichman, started to criticize Rubén Acosta when Argentina hosted the World Championships in 2002. As a consequence, Acosta excluded Goichman and the entire Argentine Federation, and to this day, the FIVB still refused to pay the Argentinian Volleyball Federation around $800,000 owed for the tournament. This has proved disastrous for Mario Goichman, who personally guaranteed for big loans to be taken up to secure a successful event. Once a wealthy businessman, Goichman is today financially and psychologically ruined. Earlier this year, he was evicted from his home by the police, and he cannot afford the medicine he needs. Fate has been much kinder to the handful of men who followed the corrupt FIVB president as his yes-men. They have distributed undisclosed but apparently large salaries among themselves after securing a narrow victory 3 months ago in the first democratic elections at the FIVB for 65 years. The president of European Volleyball, André Meyer from Luxembourg, is part of this group that denies responsibility for correcting the errors from their dubious past. International handball has for 12 years been ruled by the Egyptian Hassan Mustafa, who has traveled for more than 400,000 euros without presenting receipts. He took 600,000 euros as a private consultant to the German sports marketing company Ch05, who later acquired handball's TV rights occasionally. He has personally intervened in Olympic qualifiers and the anti-doping operations, and he has replaced a number of senior officials that tried to stick to the rules. When the European Handball Federation launched its own candidate for handball president in 2009, Hassan Mustafa simply cut his rival's microphone and was then re-elected with an overwhelming majority. You will find similar situations in a number of sports. But although they all deserve more interest than they get, much more interest, none of them can compare with the biggest corruption system documented so far in world sport, the so-called ISL scandal. ISL was once the undisputed leader in the business of buying and selling broadcasting and marketing rights in sport. It has been established by the Swiss courts that in order to reach this dominant position, the ISL paid out at least 160 million Swiss francs from 1989 to its bankruptcy in 2001, that is more or less 100 million euros, paid out as bribes to officials from a broad range of sports. Thanks to tireless work by the Swiss magistrate Thomas Hildebrand and a handful of investigative journalists from the UK, Germany and Switzerland, we now know a few of the names that took money, mainly leaders from FIFA, or should I say ex-leaders. But please bear in mind that 90% of the 100 million euro bribes are still unaccounted for. And after 10 years of silence, the sports movement still refuses to investigate who in their own ranks took the money. Perhaps some of them are still holding high positions. The IOC introduced a series of internal reforms in 1999 as a response to public outrage over a corruption scandal related to the Salt Lake City Winter Games. The IOC administers these reforms quite strictly, so no IOC member can be overtly corrupt. However, the IOC is failing its political and moral obligations to secure high ethical standards in the international federations, the so-called Olympic family. In spite of having defined a set of universal principles of good governance in sport, action is rarely taken to implement these principles, and sanctions are only given when irrefutable evidence is provided by others, typically the media. Also in the case of FIFA, it was massive public pressure that forced FIFA to initiate a reform process, which I think you have heard of. But where will these reforms lead? You will find two contrasting schools among observers and stakeholders. The one which I belong to says that real reform is impossible under a president who has developed and protected a corrupt system since 1976. Another, pragmatic and valid viewpoint, says that it is impossible to change FIFA without this president, because only he can block the way from those who struggle to avoid reform. One thing is absolutely sure. If you and I turn our eyes away from FIFA, the reform process will come to a halt faster than any of us can say money. At a debate we organized for the European Association for Sports Management recently, the two top reformers of FIFA, Swiss governance expert Mark Peeth and German ex-co-member at FIFA, Theo Zwanziger, appealed to the public, asking for critical accompaniment with an equal emphasis on both words. Critical accompaniment. I am confident that everybody in this room shares the idea that an independent association life is a vital component of a democratic society. On the other hand, we cannot allow associations to become shelters for those who abuse this freedom to practice corruption and even crime with no respect at all for the basic values of society. I think it's high time for you, as politicians, to react to what is happening in sport. Let me point, finally, to some actions you can take without compromising the autonomy of sport. It is your right and your duty to protect taxpayers' money. Sport is receiving massive public subsidies at all levels, from support to grassroots activities and local sports facilities, to investment in bidding campaigns for big events, grants to Olympic athletes, elite sport structures, etc. Governments and other public authorities are fully entitled to set the necessary conditions to ensure not only that these grants are used exclusively for the purpose, but also that the beneficiaries live up to certain standards for democracy and transparency. At the European level, you can uphold a permanent pressure on the European and international sports organizations, demanding that the ISL affair, the World Cup bribery allegations, the volleyball scandal, and other major affairs are fully investigated, errors corrected, and cases of possible criminal conduct taken to the courts. Point number 3. You can define standards of governance for those sports organizations which seek formal cooperation with the European Union. Such work has already begun in the framework of the expert group on good governance in sport, established by the Council of Ministers, as well in a number of preparatory actions financed by the Commission. One of these actions is run by Play the Game and the Danish Institute for Sport Studies and entitled Action for Good Governance in International Sports Organizations, in cooperation with 6 European universities, including Jürgen Michart, here from Deutsche Sporthochschule, and the European Journalism Center. We will present an open tool to measure standards of governance in sport in April, and we invite you to join the launch event. Item 4. Another way of taking the debate forward could be to arrange a European, or even better, an international conference on all forms of corruption in sport. Such call was sent to the IOC from 300 sports experts at the Play the Game conference in 2011 in Cologne, but so far the IOC has not reacted. You can insist on the issue of better governance in sport on at least 2 events in 2013, UNESCO's 5th Conference for Sports Ministers, MINEPS 5 it's called, in Berlin in May, and at our own Play the Game 2013 conference in the autumn. Last but not least, I suggest Europe should take the lead in creating an international clearinghouse on governance in sport, an institution that will permanently monitor and provide information exchange on how to prevent all kinds of corruption in sport. Mrs. Chair, honored members of Parliament, it seems that the plea of Tamar Sejer has been heard. The EU has started taking action. I hope your hearing today is only the first step towards pursuing more transparency and democracy and less corruption in sport. Play the Game remains at your disposal with our working experience, extended international network, and readiness to cooperate in the field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really very much, disappointing listening to you. And I think we should really do something. But you should keep in mind we are not so powerful as we want it to be. The Commission is not so powerful, but at least we have the obligation to listen to you and to try to be helpful in one another way. So thank you very much, all of you. Unfortunately, if I cannot be here, it would be good if we could listen to them. But anyway, we can do